Hello, my guest today is composer, diva, head of singing at Repton School, recent star of Facebook, and musical director of Mansfield Choral Society, Ellie Martin. Ellie, welcome to the Desert Island.
Thank you very much for having me.
You were born in London into a musical family. Tell us about them and how you first became involved in music.
So my dad's side of the family is particularly musical. Although my mum's, always appreciated music and has a very wide taste in music herself, it's my dad's side that sort of that were all sort of lots and lots of musicians. And my dad's parents were both professional musicians. They met at Trinity College of Music, where I went on to study, and my dad's father was a virtuoso pianist and organist, and my nana was an amazing singer, but she also played the flute and the piano and the guitar, and she composed and she taught. And
don't you just hate people like that?
Multi-talented, you mean? Yes, very much so.
Wonderful.
So I had sort of music in my life from a very young age, and my dad tells me that he used to rock me to sleep to Prokofiev, and so my mum and my dad both played me music from when I was very young. And also my mum's parents, my grandma, my mum's mum, although she wasn't a professional musician, she had such a love for classical music, particularly Mozart. So I always had it in my life. I was very, very lucky in that sense. It was a real privilege. And so from quite a young age, I was tinkering away at the piano, and I'd listen to my dad playing, and apparently I wrote this, I did write this Christmas song aged 6, and I wrote the lyrics and the tune, and my dad put chords to it, and he scored it up for me, and we actually found it the other day, which was rather lovely. But yeah, so then I was lucky enough to be sort of pushed in the direction of music, gently pushed, and I started having violin lessons when I was 7, and then piano lessons when I was 10. And which is, I really recognise now, is an absolute huge privilege to be given, music lessons like that. It's not cheap, and I had them from quite young. And then I joined orchestras as soon as I was able to join, the beginner strings, and it sort of went from there. And my nana, as I said, she was a wonderful musician, but she was a really big influence as well. She and my grandfather, they divorced before I was born, and she moved to the Isle of Wight. They had been in London. And so my sister and I, my younger sister and I, we would go to the Isle of Wight and spend summers there with her. And she'd sing us songs that she'd written, and she'd always be singing. We'd wake up to her warbling away in the kitchen. And it was, a really sort of important influence in my life. And she made us this book when we were very young, this beautifully decorated book to teach us beginner piano, and she painted in it because she could paint as well, and she could just so talented. So yeah, that was kind of the grounding. And then I went on to do singing quite a lot later, actually. I didn't start singing lessons until I was 15, and it was only because a friend needed someone to have joint singing lessons with her. And I sort of asked my mum, and she said, yeah, all right. And then very quickly realized it was something I loved, and sort of started to take it quite seriously, and I sort of did grade 6 very quickly, and then I did grade 8, and then I was in my sixth form years and started to think about applying for music college. But it was actually quite late. And I guess another thing that's really important to me was my secondary years. I was so lucky to have the music department when I was at school was just bustling with talent, and we had some very inspirational teachers, particularly a guy called Will Michael, who was instrumental really in me going on to take music as a career. He was the most incredible pianist, jazz pianist. He played classical, he did everything, and he could compose and he could arrange, and he sort of encouraged me to pursue it, and always sort of had this faith in me, and I was given so many performance opportunities. And because he had been in the professional jazz scene, he'd get professionals to come in and play in our school jazz concerts. And at the time I had no idea really how amazing this was, because you don't really as a kid, you just do it. And looking back, it was just incredible. And he actually became a very important person in my life, because I went out with his son, because I met him on a school trip, and it was my first boyfriend. We were together for a number of years, and so Will ended up being a good friend, and he died sadly quite a few years ago of cancer, which was devastating, and I still miss him. But I'll never forget the influence he had on me as a person and as a musician.
How have you chosen your 8 records? I know that you have very broad musical tastes, so was choosing just 8 difficult?
It was incredibly difficult. I'm sure everybody says this. Yes, and I still sort of have this. I'm still not entirely happy with my list. I still sort of have this guilt for having left others out, and I was talking to my dad about this, and he was saying, I couldn't possibly choose 8 because I'd feel far too guilty. The way that I've chosen it is I've tried to include, as you said, I've got a very broad musical taste, and I've tried to include 8 records that reflect that and that touch on all the different genres that I like to listen to. I've missed out a lot of things that I love. I'm very sad to leave out Elton John, because he had a big influence on me growing up. But in the end, I've just gone with tracks that move me, and ones that I can return to again and again and again and never get bored of.
So what's your first disc?
My first disc is Mozart's Clarinet Concerto. Particularly the second movement, the Adagio. This is a hugely important record to me. It's probably it's definitely the most sentimental one on my list. The Clarinet Concerto was one of my grandma's favourite pieces, and my mum's mum was, she died in 2014, and I was incredibly close to her. It was like a second set of parents, really, my grandma and granddad, and my granddad is still alive, but she died very suddenly, and she'd always said to me for many, many years that she wanted that at her funeral, and she just adored Mozart, and I've got lovely memories of her on sunny holidays with her CD Walkman. Well, it was tape and then it was CD, and it was always just Mozart all the time. And I've got lovely memories of being in the car with her and granddad, and my granddad doesn't really like Mozart, and she'd turn it up and he'd turn it down, and she'd turn it up again and sort of sing along loudly to the music. And it's just lovely memories I have of her. And she particularly asked for this piece. So when she died, I organised the music for it. It seemed like quite a natural choice of person to do that, and also it gave me something to focus on. And we had that movement playing as the coffin came in. So whilst it's sad, I can never not think of her when I listen to it, and it's not something I listen to that often, but there are times where I don't want to listen to anything else, and I can always just I'll put it on and I just think about her. And sometimes it makes me sad and sometimes it makes me very happy, but it's just such an important piece of music for me.